Thanks to all the folks at Forum for the invitation to be here and to come out from San Francisco. Is this beer available, by the way? Just kidding. Just kidding. And it's really an honor to be here. I've been learning so much from the other presenters. So it's a great privilege to be here, and thanks so much for the invitation. I've got 200 slides with very small font text, and so before I start, I thought it might be good just to get up and stretch for a second. I know we're close to lunch, but just for a quick second, yeah, good stretch. Okay, very nice. Whew, yeah, I really needed that. Good. Nice. I just wanted to find out, the light's a little blinding here, but who's at the beginning of their career as an artist, as a designer, as an urbanist? Who's just getting started out there? Okay. Okay, good show of hands, great. And how many transportation engineers are in the audience today? Transportation planners? There's one. There's one. Okay, welcome. How many developers, property developers? Did I miss, is there another one? Property developers, okay, great. Excellent, excellent, cool. Well, this slideshow is just for you guys, and I'm glad you came today. I think that often, at these events, we often end up preaching to the choir, and so I'm really excited when folks from transportation planning, developers all come and can be part of the conversation, which is really important. 10 years ago, some friends and I in San Francisco started an experiment. We thought, what if we could reshape a tiny part of San Francisco? And we studying the city a bit, we learned that a quarter of the city's land area is streets and public right-of-way. It's like a quarter of San Francisco's land area was streets, and yet 70% of that space was dedicated to moving or storing cars. We thought, well, that's not right. Maybe we can change this equation a little bit. And so we thought, let's put some coins in a parking meter. Let's lease this space, which is actually heavily subsidized in San Francisco, as it is in many parts of the world. Parking spaces are heavily subsidized. Therefore, just for a couple dollars an hour, we could lease this space for doing whatever we wanted to do. And we thought, well, why don't we roll out some grass and put up a potted bench and a tree and set up a little mini park? And then we withdrew. We went across the street and just watched to see what would happen. And lo and behold, this gentleman in the blue shirt came and sat down and was having a piece of pizza on the park bench, and then this fella came up and was sitting on the tree, and they started having a conversation. And I thought, great, the project is a success. We created an invitation for social activation, whereas previously it was just storing a big chunk of metal. So great, big success. We posted this picture on the internet, on a friend's website, actually, and somehow it circulated around the world, around the blogosphere. This was in 2005. And we started getting calls from people in other cities saying, hey, this is such a cool idea. Can you come and create this parking project in Santa Monica or in Italy or elsewhere? And I was working as a landscape architect at the time. I couldn't really leave my job and fly around the world, which now I have the chance to do today. But back then, I thought that why don't we share the idea? And so, inspired by IKEA, actually, like the simplicity of the IKEA manual, we took our guerrilla art intervention, for which we had never gotten permission from the city, by the way, and turned it into this how-to manual and posted that on our website. And now, using this as a tool, people from around the world started taking the idea and making it their own. This was in Santa Monica, in Sicily, in Manchester, England. And so the project grew, and it grew way beyond what we ever anticipated. In order to sort of guide its growth as an open source project to kind of impart those values of generosity, of a public offering, we created this website where people could meet from around the world and come up with ideas for installing something other than a car in a parking space. And the project continued to grow and expand. People take this idea and use it for whatever their political will or objective is: free public health clinic on a dangerous street, calling the attention to the need for more public open space, or simply places to play in cities. Whatever it is, and then the project started to spread around the world. This is Seoul, South Korea, Tehran, Iran, and Sacramento, California. So what's interesting is that it seems like parking is almost like the gateway drug for urban transformation, kind of like bacon is to vegetarians. Do you know what I'm talking about? So in a few short years, our literally $200 guerrilla art intervention has become a global public participatory art project called Parking Day, and it's far exceeded our expectations. In 2011, when we stopped counting, there was about 1,000 parks, 160 cities, 35 countries, 6 continents, all except Antarctica. We're waiting for a park in Antarctica. So that's the sort of the beginning of the story. I want to talk a little bit today about my personal evolution from an artist, a guerrilla artist, to what I am now, which is an urban designer, and talk about how over the last decade, I think, you know, my work has both shaped, and I've really been shaped by the changes happening in cities and the way we think about and plan and design and activate urban spaces. And the point of my talk today is that you, whether you're an architect or a designer or an artist or urban resident, you are the city. We are the city, and you have a responsibility and an opportunity to make the city great. We can all make changes, and I want to talk about how small things can really have big impact in the world. A little bit about my story. I studied art in the Art Studio of Chicago. I lived in the Pilsen neighborhood, which at that time was a primarily Latino neighborhood. I biked to school every day. I was a very poor artist living in the city, but I was surrounded by incredible street art. And some of my first work as an art student was doing performances in public space. And I just really began to understand how wild it is to do work in the public realm because of a word that Theaster used. It's indeterminacy. You actually never know what's going to happen if you do something in public space. So I got sort of really turned on by that practice of working in the public realm. I left art school. I was sort of disappointed with the liberal education. I was also turned off by what I felt was the sort of exclusivity and the subjectivity of how you created value in the art world. I left art school trying to get more experiences. I ended up in Alaska working on a purse seiner fishing boat for the summer, which was quite an experience. And in Alaska, I got turned on to biology and science, medicinal plants. And that led me back to my home state of Massachusetts, where I studied biology and biochemistry. I really got turned on by the incredible sculptural shapes of the molecules that kind of determine the everyday life, our internal chemistry. Really fascinated by their sculptural forms. That led me to my first job was actually working in a lab in a pharmaceutical company making medicines from plants. But I was working in a place like this, and I quickly discovered I wasn't cut out for industrial pharmaceutical research, so I literally opened the door and ran screaming out of this window all the way to the Bay Area, to the Promised Land, the west coast of the US, and I landed at Berkeley, where I started studying landscape architecture and environmental design. And it was at Berkeley that I encountered the great legacy of academics like Alan Jacobs, who talked about the value of public space, the value of streets. I spent some time in Paris with Peter Bosman, walking around, understanding this relationship between urban form and the way that it shapes and informs how we inhabit cities. Claire Cooper Marcus. I also encountered this guy, Jan Gyal, in his book Life Between Buildings, which was pretty formative and part of our curriculum at Berkeley. After I graduated, pressing the clicker, if I sing, does that work, Theaster? If I sing to it? I started a job as a landscape architect in San Francisco, working for a great firm. It was the best job of my life. And I was working on projects like this. I was doing drawings, plans, graphics, but I never saw the results of my work. In fact, I started this project maybe 10 years ago. They still haven't broken ground. So I got quite frustrated by what seemed to be the long process between a design move and really understanding the results or implications of creative work. Thus, this first experiment in 2005, Parking Day, and really learning how to take action, just get out there and do it, this attitude of experimentation, not asking for permission, but asking for forgiveness after the fact. Well, a couple years after this first Parking Day installation, we were approached by the folks in City Hall, and I thought, okay, this is it. They're finally going to give us the fine us for Parking Day. They're finally going to shut this thing down. Instead, no, as Timo pointed out yesterday, the folks in City Hall said, this is a great idea. And we said, cool, well, why don't we make it a city program? Hey, National Parking Day, what do you think? The guys from the city at that point said, no way, don't do it. If you make it a city project, that'll totally kill its creativity. Don't even try. And so we thought, all right, great, well, we'll just keep going. So my colleagues, Matthew Passmore and Blaine Merker, a friend from my neighborhood in the Mission, and then someone I recruited from one of my colleagues at Berkeley, Blaine Merker, we formed this group called Rebar. And we started continuing to experiment in cities and public space, trying to fulfill unmet needs. So for instance, with these private public spaces that every city has now, how do they compare to publicly owned public spaces? Is there a difference in their kind of social codes that govern them? So again, trying to fulfill unmet needs, we set up this event called Nappening. How many of you wish you could take a midday nap during the workday, right? It's a latent desire, but we don't, only the Spanish seem to have come up with this idea of the siesta. I really wish more countries would adopt that idea. So we set up this free facility to take a nap. We scheduled 15-minute naps. We rang you up. Awoke you with a nice bell. We served milk and cookies, and this was book solid all day. You wouldn't believe it. Book solid. To trying to soften the urban landscape. Urban spaces, when you build something, brick and mortar tends to be kind of hard. It tends to be kind of rough. And our idea was, well, maybe we could introduce a bit of softness into the urban landscape. Maybe that would change the way we feel about cities. And so, using these combination of forces, Gumball, Automat, Merkin, Furry, Colony, Swarm, we created Bush Waffle, which is a vending machine inflatable furniture. Is this video going to work? Let's see. No? Okay, that's okay. Well, here I'm prototyping it on the city streets in San Francisco. And this is what we created, this little pink inflatable device called Bush Waffle. It tessellates together so you can create your own urban architecture. And the idea was put the tools of shaping the city into the hands of urban residents so we can create our own environment and atmosphere and perhaps soften the urban landscape a bit. This is the Bush Waffle, early experiment. You could create these bowl-type shapes and carry it around the city. Again, create your own architecture. Again, the idea is like, can we give urban residents the tool to shape the city themselves? And what is the outcome? Sometimes it's something we can't predict. Every time we set these up and thought people were going to use them a certain way, somebody came up and used them in an entirely different way, and again, changes our perception about what they were for. But again, early experiment in softening the urban landscape. All the way to thinking about the role of urban agriculture in cities. With parking, we had put so much grass and so many asphalt parking lots around the city. I thought, boy, now it's time to take up some of that grass. It's sucking up way too much water. Why don't we remove some lawn, actually, and grow some food? So we convinced the mayor, Mayor Gavin Newsom, to tear up his lawn. We gave the lawn away on the television. People came from all over the Bay Area to pick up lawn. Tore it up, and we installed a community garden, working with hundreds of volunteers from urban gardening organizations throughout the Bay Area. We planted a bunch of organic seedlings and started growing food. And for a period of 6 months, we grew food in front of City Hall. We grew about 1,000 pounds of food that was donated to local food banks and distributed to the poor and needy in San Francisco. Interesting experiment. Again, an example where a temporary public art project influenced city policy, whereas now in the city of San Francisco, it's legal now to use areas under an acre of land to grow and produce and sell food, actually, which is kind of changing the economy and the role of young urban agriculturalists in the city of San Francisco. These are all examples, I would say, of what is now known pretty well as tactical urbanism. How many folks are familiar with that term or know Mike Lydon's book, Tactical Urbanism? Right, so it's about how short-term, temporary solutions can influence long-term change. It's about starting now. It's about doing less planning and taking more action and being a little bit uncertain about what the outcome is. So while we were doing this stuff in San Francisco, New York was taking it a bit further with Jeanette Sadi-Khan and the Bloomberg administration and their Plaza program. So it started with a strategic objective. We want a high-quality open space within a 10-minute walk from every New Yorker. So they worked out if they tried to do this the typical way of 5 years of planning, $2.5 million capital campaign, build the park, and then evaluate it, they'd never reach that objective. So using a tactical approach, actually, they learned that by, in a fraction of the time, a fraction of the money, you could actually achieve that objective doing something called a pilot project, which also allowed you to circumvent the typical lengthy environmental review process. So, by calling something a pilot, New York City was able to install literally dozens of these little plazas all around the city and achieve their longer-term strategic objective for a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the time. Interesting, these spaces they're public spaces, they're plazas. Some of them have greenery, but as Enrique pointed out yesterday, these are much more streets and are much more related to parks than they are to, or sidewalks are much more related to parks than they are to the vehicular right-of-way. And that's the case for these spaces as well, which weren't built by the Parks Department, but were built by New York City's Department of Transportation, right? The transportation engineers actually had to alter their bureaucratic machinery, their operating procedures to understand that they can actually contribute to making a wonderful and really inclusive public realm in the city. So again, this was happening in New York. Now there's dozens of these plazas around all the boroughs in New York, and my firm now, Gyal Studio, we're doing a social impact study on these plazas to understand what they've meant in terms of the social life of the neighborhoods where they exist. Back to San Francisco. So inspired by what was happening in New York, the folks in San Francisco, Jeanette Sadiq Khan came to San Francisco and said, look guys, look what we're doing in New York. Why don't you try something like this in San Francisco? We did a few pop-up plazas in San Francisco. They turned out to be kind of complicated to build. But this guy, this is one of my heroes in San Francisco. It's Andres Power. He was appointed by the mayor's office in the mayor's office of greening to try some of the stuff that New York was doing. They call it the Pavement to Parks program. And I want to acknowledge this figure, and I also want to acknowledge a woman from yesterday, Irma. Yes. Is Irma Ranieri out there still? You still out there, Irma? Huh? She's gone back. Okay, well, you know what? Okay, please do. So this guy works in city government, but he's really willing to take risks to try something new. I call this type of person a guerrilla bureaucrat. They are totally crucial for having anything innovative happening in cities, and I really want to applaud them for doing the hard work they do, and I want to applaud Irma for doing the critical work that she's doing, changing the culture of the machine. It's so critical, it's so important, and I think these folks should be honored in the same way that we honor our basketball players and other sort of stars. These, for me, are the stars of the city. The guerrilla bureaucrats, we totally need them, and they need our political cover, actually, as citizens and activists. So anyway, Andres Power, appointed by the mayor's office to try some of this stuff in San Francisco, said, well, why don't we take your parking guerrilla art project and turn it into a city policy, a parklet program. So we did a couple pilots, trying it out in San Francisco. Doop. Doop, doop, doop. And we called it a walklet, actually. Our first approach to this was called a walklet. This was the first site in the Mission District in San Francisco where I live. Here was our rendering. We created this bamboo carpet with this modular system that you could set up and invite people to walk off the sidewalk and occupy this space. Critical to know, and part of this program was that these are public spaces. In many cities, you see cafe, table, and chair permits, which allow restaurants to extend their service space onto the sidewalk, which is part of the public realm. This is different. This is extending the sidewalk out into the street. So these are public spaces as much as they are a public-private partnership. This evolved into the parklet program in San Francisco. Now I think there's something like 30 or 40, close to 40 of these around the city. They're these tiny spaces, individually they're maybe not that significant, but I think what's cool about them and neat about them is that they're these really individual, highly nuanced expressions of the public realm. It's very different than a city-led sidewalk widening or public realm improvement project in that these reflect the character and identity of the people who create them. So the way it works is the city issues the permit. That's all the city does. The project sponsor designs, builds, and maintains the parklet, right? So in the case of City of San Francisco, well, we've got limited resources for maintaining public space. This is an example where a private citizen, whether you're a gallery or a cafe or whatever, builds one of these spaces but also agrees to care for it. If you don't care for it, the city revokes the permit and they take it away. Again, it's an example of a tactical approach to trying to expand the character and quality of public realm in the city. So these are examples of parklets, some of which I've designed, some of which are numerous other designers in San Francisco and other parts of the world. I've heard that Perth is starting a parklet program. Is that true? Yeah? Say what? In the city of Vincent. Cool. And Fremantle as well. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so this was the difficult work that Andres Power did, actually. So taking my guerrilla art project, my collaborator's guerrilla art project, and turning it into a city policy. Doop. Look at this. Now this is the artwork right here, actually. So this is actually a streamlined permit approval process. Can you believe that? Isn't it a beautiful diagram? But this is the difficult work, actually, taking, this permitting agency from the Public Works, this permit regulatory framework from Transportation Authority, and smoothing that out, actually navigating that so your average everyday person can take advantage of this. It's about lowering the barrier to entry so that average everyday citizens can be part of shaping the public realm. This was the kind of act of genius, I think, that Andres pulled off, which really builds upon our guerrilla art project in a significant way. So now, having created this how-to manual, the Parklet-O-Matic, they call it, now we're seeing parklet programs and similar things popping up all over the country and all over the world. Pretty exciting. So parklets in Boston, in Philadelphia. There's one in Miami. Can you believe it? If Miami can do parklets, then anybody can. Los Angeles. They're popping up in Los Angeles. Just incredible. These are ones in Mexico City that are actually portable, that you can move by car. One of the things that's interesting is actually that in my neighborhood in San Francisco, the local community groups don't want parklets. For them, they actually represent a vector of gentrification. They see parklets and actually public space improvements in general being one of the tools and agents for unwanted change, which results in displacement in my neighborhood. So it's very interesting. In my neighborhood, parklets aren't welcome. And I want to talk about, the way that you deploy some of these public-private partnerships, these innovative tools, is really critically important from an equity perspective, that you talk about equitable geographic distribution. I think for those of you who are starting parklet programs, it's important to think about not just in the neighborhoods who are politically savvy or wealthy enough to navigate the political process now, but think about distributing that benefit actually to where those benefits are really needed. Equitable distribution, really important. So moving on, innovating as an artist, trying to push the idea further all the time, we came up with this idea of Park Cycle Swarm. What if we could create a downloadable kit where you could build your own little mini park and pedal around the city to create a park where and when you needed it? Park Cycle Swarm aggregate together to create like a slime mold of urban open space. So I went out to Copenhagen, actually. I worked with an genius artist and designer in Copenhagen called Jan Sorven, who helped me build this Park Cycle Swarm prototype. While I was in Copenhagen, I thought, hey, I'll go check out these Gail Architects guys. It seems like everywhere I went in the world, whether it was to Sydney for the Laneways Art Festival a couple years ago, or to Amsterdam, to London, Jan Gyal had already been there a few years before me. It's like, who is this guy, Jan Gyal? What's he doing? He's a couple steps ahead of me all the time. So I thought I'd go check out Gail Architects' office in Copenhagen. I'd learned about their work at Berkeley, of course, and then had seen that Jan had updated and published these fantastic books, Cities for People, How to Study Public Life. This book, by the way, codifies 40 years of public life research into a $20 book. I highly recommend it. So I show up at Gail's office. I learn about how they helped transform Copenhagen over the last 30 years, from a car-choked urban center to the most livable city as it's known today. And lo and behold, I show up at the Gail Architects office, and they're hanging out in a parking space. They're having lunch together in a parking space. Wonderful. So I met Hella, who's the CEO. She actually runs the company, a woman named Hella, one of Jan's former students. And I learned about this technique that we now use called the Public Space Public Life Survey, which I think was done here in Perth. Is that correct? Several years ago? Does anybody know? A PSPL study? And it's really about counting people. And when you talk about making great cities, how do you do that? I think it's about how do you put people first. It's about starting to observe and count people, to measure life in your city, and to determine what kind of life you want to achieve in a particular place. So this is what, and how you put that into action is what we learned from my work at Rebar, this process called iterative placemaking. At Gyal, we call it measure, test, refine. So measuring is counting people, testing is doing the pilot project, and then you learn from that act, that tactical act, to make more informed, better strategic investments down the road. Let me give you an example of that. So again, this is what I learned from Jan, and Enrique Penalosa brought this up yesterday, that we seem to know more about creating habitat for animals in zoos than we do about creating human habitat, right? But a way that we create a city for people is a city for people is one where people count. How do you make people count? By counting people. Let me show an example how we did this in New York City. So, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan came to New York. She rode on the separated bikeways in Copenhagen. She thought, this is fantastic. We need to bring this to New York. How did you do this, Gail Architects? And Jan said, well, it took us about 30 years. Incremental change, measuring, shaping city policy. It took us about 30 years. Jeanette said, well, we've got 36 months, Bloomberg's administration. But they started the process. We went to Times Square, and we noticed that we started counting people. We noticed that 90% of the people in Times Square were on foot. But 90% of the space in Times Square was allocated for moving or storing cars. That's not a balanced equation, so it was pretty easy with this kind of data for us to convince the Bloomberg administration to say, hey, why don't we try something? Literally overnight, we shut down portions of Times Square to private vehicles. And because some mistakes in the planning process, we couldn't get the furniture we were looking for, and so we ended up going to Costco, which is a local kind of buy everything mart, and buying these cheap lawn chairs. Nonetheless, people came out to the space and totally enjoyed it. And instead of New Yorkers saying, well, hey, why have we shut down Times Square to cars? The New Yorkers said, hey, we need better furniture. This is New York City. You can't give us these crappy lawn chairs. We need much better furniture. But, here's the thing, and this was like part of a 5-year process of gradually changing the mindset about how we use urban space. What do we value in cities? Do we value people crammed on the sidewalks? Or do we value, creating generous spaces for people in cities? And the role of the artist in here was critical. So that first iteration was kind of very simple. The next design iteration, the next move, was to do this beautiful painted graphic that represented flowing raw water throughout the space. In the meantime, we've transformed the identity of Times Square from this iconic image of the cars and traffic and the hustle and bustle to this. Can you believe this? All this, thousands of people doing yoga in Times Square. I mean, this is a total change of mindset for the city. And if you had asked New Yorkers, 5 years ago, hey, what do you think about shutting down Times Square to cars? They would have said, no way, are you kidding me? Forget about it. But when you demonstrate full scale with a pilot project and show people the results, show an example, and also capture the data about the reduction in pedestrian fatalities, about how traffic's actually moving faster through some of these areas because we've rationalized the intersections, about how there's more social life and activity, this really makes a big difference and an impact whether you're a bureaucrat or whether you're a politician or whether you're a funder or whether you're a citizen just wanting to know how can I be part of making a better city. This is how we've done this in New York. So this is what Gail was doing in New York City. This is the Park Cycle project. It was designed for an art festival in Baku, Azerbaijan. So there I was after I did a month-long stint as a design resident at Gail Architects. Went back to San Francisco, working at Rebar. Took the Park Cycle to Baku, and it worked wonderfully, actually. We could pedal this thing around the city, getting out in traffic. They actually link together to create this great kind of aggregated public open space. And it's an open source design. You can download the plans for this on the internet through Jan's website. It worked beautifully. It's a great project. Had so much fun in Baku. Had a great time in the city. And yet, on my way to and from the airport, I had learned that they had just completed this something like 30-kilometer, freeway going through all these urban neighborhoods with literally no pedestrian crossings. The pedestrians were put underground in tunnels like rats. I'm not going to show you the videos of all the pedestrian fatalities that have happened on this road in the last 5 years. It's absolutely absurd. I cannot believe that anywhere in the world we're still building roads like this. So that's when I really made the decision to join forces with Gail, to change my practice a little bit, to shift a little bit from urban art to more urban design. And now we've opened up an office in San Francisco and New York. A lot of the folks from my rebar office in San Francisco have become Gyal Studio San Francisco. We've got this incredible team, really smart people. Now we're working all over the world doing great stuff. And we're trying to take it back to San Francisco and transform our main civic spine, Market Street, with some of these approaches. My colleague Jeff Rism came up with this idea of the living innovation zone. Well, how about if we take the idea of activating a parking space, but let's try it on underutilized space in the city. So it doesn't just have to happen in parking spaces. We can also do it in other parts of the city that could benefit from more minds, more thinking, more creativity, more energy in the public realm. For this first living innovation zone, the idea was like a bureaucracy-free zone. All the city is doing is like clearing the pathway and allowing other actors to come in and activate in different ways, according to their own will, desire, interest, kind of like a parking day installation. In this case, it was with the Exploratorium, which is an incredible science and technology museum. They're taking their tools about communicating ways of knowing and understanding the world out into public space, in the public realms. There's these whispering dishes where you can sit and interact with one another from several meters across. A bench where when you hold hands, it generates music. You have to hold hands together to generate the music. And indeed, by measuring and observing, we found that there's more social life, more new kind of activities, teaching, meeting. There's 20 times more people hanging out in this space, spending time, instead of just passing through. And there's more use at night. So this is a great idea. It's cultivating and inviting the kind of social life that we want to achieve in this part of San Francisco. So that leads me to what Carol mentioned actually the other day, the Market Street Prototyping Festival. This is an example where the city planning department, trying to learn from user-generated ground-level projects like Parking Day, the Parklet program, is attempting to hack its own bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are really critically important for equity in cities and kind of distributing benefits, but it's really difficult to change their operating procedures. It's probably one of the toughest things in the world. So understanding that, the folks in the city planning department are saying, well, why don't we invite other users to help us shape the city and come up with some new ideas, perhaps prototyping both new spatial ideas for how we can activate Market Street, but actually new permit processes, new instruments, new ways for delivering better public space faster. And so this was just last weekend in San Francisco with a grant from the Knight Foundation. It was an international competition, 50 projects of $2,000 each. I was actually quite skeptical of this. I said, that's not going to work, you guys. That's not a whole lot of money. Then I realized that our Parking Day project only cost $200. So, okay, let's give it a go. Let's see here. And this is what it looked like last weekend in San Francisco. Just a fantastic collection of projects, 50 projects from a lot of designers from the Bay Area, but also other parts of the world. Moving the clicker. And this guy right here, Neil, the guy smiling, looking at the camera, he's the current guerrilla bureaucrat. I'm so proud of this guy. City planner, involved in the long-term change of Market Street, but willing to give up power, give up control, and invite a lot of public engagement and an activation in shaping this really critical part of the city. So Neil has been one of the pioneers for the Better Market Street, or Market Street Prototyping Festival. And this is what it was like last weekend, communicating from across the street using these digital signals and large-scale musical instruments. Chimes built by a local school, a rocking chair lawn, ping pong tables, wishing wall, houselets. Building on the parklet idea, maybe we can solve some of San Francisco's affordability crisis by putting tiny little houses in parking spots. My God, we could use more spaces like this in San Francisco. The California College of Arts trying out new experimental ways for learning environments out in the public realm. To inviting the ecology of Market Street. So it turns out that Market Street is habitat for the western swallowtail. But they're often dropping, the caterpillars are dropping looking for habitat, and so this this artist group, this designer group, came up with a technique or a tool here, an instrument to capture capture the caterpillars so they could then generate and turn into butterflies. Pretty interesting. New topography, swinging chairs, space to draw. And what was cool about this was that I've never had more fun on Market Street. I've never seen a more diverse gathering of people from all sectors of the city, all types of neighborhoods coming out and enjoying ourselves together in public space. Again, everything was free. There was libraries, there was learning labs, experimental sites. And it was a big success, huge turnout. And now the trick is, well, how do we transform this into permanent change for Market Street? And the way we're going to do that is by what my firm did, what Gyal did, so we trained a whole fleet of volunteers, and we called them the Public Life Corps, actually, to go and observe. Oh yeah, this is so Carol mentioned this this pea planter thing. What's cool about this is, so this is it's a portable urinal that filters the pee through a garden. And you know what? This was a hack into the festival itself. It wasn't even an official project. I know these guys. It was so cool. I just saw them setting this thing up on Market Street. I said, hey, this is cool. I didn't know you guys were in the festival. And they said, oh, we're not. We just hacked it with this pea planter. Totally fulfilling an unmet need in San Francisco. Absolutely, there's a lot of people that pee in the street. This is a great solution. Again, it's one of those things that's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Awesome idea. But again, you know, so many different ways of knowing, acting, engaging. This is another hack, all right? These guys live in the neighborhood. They say, hey, what's this festival going on? We're going to create our own little ping pong table. And that's exactly what you want, to generate that kind of life and activity and invitation for folks from all across the city to feel like this is our space. This is our city. We make the city. We own it. This is our territory. Activating spaces at night, movies, all sorts of fun activities. And so it was a really cool festival. Here's the folks from some of our volunteers from the Public Life Corps looking at their data, figuring out, well, which one of these installations generated more foot traffic? Which one of these installations had more young people, more old people, more women, more children? And can we use that data to think about how we can catalyze and inform long-term investment, long-term change in our city? So I've never had more fun on Market Street. It was a great event. It remains to be seen now how this can catalyze the next move or the next step, but we're working hard to do it. I think my role here today is for those of you who are just starting out to think that it doesn't take, you know, a multi-million-dollar investment to change your city. It can start with a couple $100s. How do you do it? Start with a parking space, create your own living innovation zone project, maybe start a prototyping festival. Really fun thing to do. And I'm sure we'll be creating a how-to manual to do that pretty shortly. But the point is that, if I can just make it through these last few slides, come on, clicker, you can do it. Do a community garden, do a living innovation zone, a bureaucracy-free zone in your city. Can you imagine the kind of creative fertility that would generate? But the point is that whether, you know, if you're an artist, if you're a designer, whether you're an architect, put people first in your city. As an artist designer, you have the power. We are the city. You have the power to make your city great. Thank you.